Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
3 million miles in a Volvo and other curious car stories. 50 fascinating lives with cars. It's a whistle-stop tour of 50 fascinating petrol heads and how they changed car culture for good. It is a new book by Giles Chapman, and I'm not quite sure who joins us live on the lines now, and I'm not sure what you call two Giles in an interview, Giles.
Yes, I don't. Rare.
Rare.
You know, so yes, and thank goodness it's not Giles Coran, is all I can say.
Let's not even go there, hey?
He's a lovely man.
I'm sure. I'm on his Christmas card list as well.
Yeah.
The relationship.
Anyway, thanks for having me.
Pleasure's all mine. Pleasure's all mine. Now you're not knee deep in an oil sump or anything like that. So what is the raison d'être, if you will, behind this book?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been writing car books for a long time, and obviously, mostly they tend to be about cars, and they're full of stats and things about engineering and race results and all the rest of it. And in all the years I've been researching this stuff, you know, I've come across tons and tons of interesting people. Sometimes I've even been asked to write obituaries of certain characters or profiles of certain people, or you know, just these the unseen characters behind the creation of cars in all different directions, whether it's car design, racing, car salespeople, celebrities who've driven or been interested in cars. And so, you know, when you sort of sometimes pop back into your cuttings, you know, and you reread something you did a few years ago, you just think, my God, that actually person was quite fascinating individually. And so the idea grew to do, instead of a book of cars again, is to do a book of car people. And I had no particular overall a kind of reason to do it, other than just I thought there's a lot of people I've written about, and in some cases I sort of almost know more about them than anyone else for various weird reasons. And I thought, why not put them into a little book where you can get all of my stuff on this particular topic in one place. And you know, it sounds easy because you just think, oh, well, you just corral 50 pieces you wrote and, you know, the book's written sort of thing. And it's not like that at all.
It doesn't work like that, does it? No.
Not really, no. And also they were all different lengths. So, I mean, I've written in some cases like 3,000 words on sort of a certain car designer. And I needed to really cut that back and try and make it so that as you got into the book, you found things that you weren't expecting, people you weren't expecting. I've got everyone in there from Peter Sellers to Joseph Lucas. So it goes in all directions. And so my publisher is so kind of reasonable at sort of accepting daft ideas. But in this case, they said to me, you know, can you come up with a title that is just weird? You know, I mean, this is lovely for authors. You know, everyone's telling you to be ordinary and straightforward all the time. When somebody says go mad, you know, it's lovely. And they had a book on railway anecdotes, weird railway stories, which had been called the Galloping Sausage and 100, you know, weird railway tales.
Right.
So they said, you know, this is go for something like that. So I came up with lots of suggestions, and the one they went with, 3 million miles in a Volvo, is actually a guy I interviewed many years ago, an American chap called Irv Gordon, who bought a Volvo in the 1960s, got into the driving seat on the day he turned up at the dealer, and sort of almost never left the driving seat for the rest of his life. I mean, he did 3.2 million miles in the end, and he was just such a lovely man to interview. Sadly, now departed, but so generous, and he had no idea of his own innate weirdness, really. But you know, he told me this.
Well, one, he's an American getting in the 60s getting a Volvo. That's for start, because this is the time of big American, you know, we're thinking Dodge Charger, we're thinking Steve McQueen and Bullets. And Volvos at that point, if I'm thinking mid to late 60s, they're not the sort of the cubist sort of keep you can't turn the lights off mobiles of the 70s, as I grew in the back of everybody in the 70s in sort of Shropshire had a Volvo estate. It was the family wagon. So he's presumably in one of the sort of, I don't know, Inge Blomqvist sort of Volvo, is he, or something like that?
No, he's in a Volvo P1800, a bit like the one that was in The Saint, if anyone remembers that show.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he'd had a few. He was a fairly well-paid teacher who had to commute every day. Had a few American cars, didn't like them for various reasons. Somebody suggested a Volvo to him. He'd never even heard of Volvo. He went to the dealer. He loved it, and that was it. And off he went. And he had it air freighted to Europe at least twice, and did tours here, including a visit to the factory that had made it. And he would go everywhere, all over the States. 100 miles was no problem. He told me this rather touching story about getting married, and his wife was a travel agent. And at first he would sort of say, hey, do you fancy a trip to Quebec for lunch from New York? And she said, yeah, okay. So they would drive like 400 miles.
Whoa.
And, I think she did it the first few times. And then after that, she said, I tell you what, you drive and I'll fly.
Yes.
And years down the line, they got divorced. Because he really did seem to sort of love driving this car more than anything else. But he was so, he was so benign about it when he talked to me. I just loved talking to him. He was great.
Perhaps it was the idea that they actually go to Sweden on holiday and visit the Volvo, the Volvo factory itself. That was maybe the marriage breaker.
Possibly, yeah, but he had a lot of good advice for people who want to make a car last for a very long time.
Okay.
For example, always get the same brand of petrol, never put it away wet. He kept it outside all the time, so it was never in a garage. So he said, don't put a cover on it because that will wear the paint off. Try and stick with the same garage and mechanic you get it from. So he actually gave me, 10 tips to how to make your car last 3 million miles.
Now, the listeners will be absolutely kissing themselves, and I said kissing themselves with laughter, because, as they all know, but you don't, my father was a professional racing driver, never had a serious crash in the 60s and 70s during a very dangerous time. He was long-distance sports car racing, never had a serious crash. So I reckon he's done a deal with a small demon, because he never had a serious crash. I have inherited all his bad luck, and so basically I just look at a car and the wheels will fall off. I am legendary. I've even broken a Land Cruiser, for goodness sake, Giles. So the 10 tips to save exactly. So
well, the tips would make the car last a long time. But somebody in this book that I know you're going to like, Giles, is Niels Bolin.
Right.
Who, I'm sure most people have never heard of. He's the inventor of the 3-point safety belt.
Yep.
So, he's reckoned to have saved 1 million lives, this guy. And he started off as an expert in ejector seats for fighter jets.
Right.
And, he ended up coming up with this harness that not only goes across your belly, which is a sort of single lap belt, but one that goes from the top of your neck all the way down to your hip as well. So that if you are unlucky enough, as it sounds like you might be, to have the odd, the odd prang, that you're going to walk away with, bruises and nothing else.
Isn't this the one that he gave? Didn't they give the patent away for free? Isn't this another Swede thing? And he gives it away for free.
Absolutely, they did. Yeah, and a lovely quote which I put in the book was, he said, when I work with fighter pilots, they would do anything to survive in an accident. When I had to deal with drivers, they moaned and complained about having to put a safety belt on. And I don't know, your dad would definitely remember this, and maybe even you do. But when seatbelts were first made a legal requirement in 1983, people regarded it as an infringement of their human rights. Instead of a way to survive an accident.
Absolutely, nanny state. I'll do what I want. You said, putting the Lambert and Butler in the ashtray, etc. And of course, it was only in the front seat, so the kids in the back could bounce along as happily as they possibly could do. I remember happily sliding around on the back of the leather BMW seats with my sisters as Dad cornered at some speed. So there you go.
He also pioneered lots. In fact, hitting on that particular topic, he then was the person who pushed for rear seat belts as well, and eventually rear 3-point seat belts. So he's a hugely important person that nobody knows about, and that's why I love to include him. And what you said about your dad being a racing driver in the 60s, I've got a guy in here called Les Leston.
Oh, I know. Yeah, we knew Les. We absolutely knew.
Did you really?
Yes, we did.
You actually knew him?
Yeah, we knew Les Leston. Yes.
Well, he was an amazing guy. He started off as a sort of jazz drummer, and got into sort of selling off old bits of aircraft with his dad in the 1950s and 60s. And in the end, he was a safety campaigner for racing drivers too. He sort of created this flame-proof racing overalls, which again has saved many, many people in the 1960s from nasty burns and worse. But he's also quite known as the king of the go faster accessory. You know, the sort of stripe that goes over the bonnet, the bullet-shaped wing mirrors, the tiny steering wheel on your Mini, all those things that, you know, all boy racers in the 60s and 70s had to have. It was all down to Les, because he was a cheeky chap, and he certainly knew about, you know, how he could sort of fraud merchandise.
This is the great thing about, especially because you was it Classic Car Magazine you were editor of, and so
a long time ago.
Yeah, but during that sort of 50s, that post-war generation, and what Ferrari dismisses as the garagistas, it was all these sort of cheeky chappies like Bernie, like Les, who were sort of putting things together and designing cars. And I'm thinking like John Cooper here as well, who obviously is a huge figure in motor racing, but also in normal motoring as well. So there was that sort of connect between, you know, with their cars, and people will always have a favourite car that they react on a visceral level.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've got so many. It's very difficult to say. I mean, yesterday I was interviewing a lovely man called Paul Easter, who I'm afraid he's not in the book, but he was the chap who won the Monte Carlo Rally in 1965 with. He was the co-driver with Timo.
Oh, Timo. Okay.
You know, and he was showing me all his scrapbooks of pictures, and you know, I just got that longing to get a Mini Cooper myself. They're so much fun. Visceral is exactly right. You know, there's very little between you and the road. And they're so nippy and manoeuvrable. It doesn't need power steering. That would take the enjoyment out of throwing it around, you know. So I can go from that to sort of looking at a Roll Silver Shadow and also sort of thinking, God, does anything look more elegant than a 30-year-old roller in a nice colour? I can go in all sorts of directions, really, for my favourite cars.
Now, tell me about metal underpants. You're not wearing them now, and they're not obviously something you can buy on the next Iron Maiden tour. So how on earth, in a book about going around the world of Volvo, etc., and Les Leston, can you actually... And remember, it's not past the 12 o'clock watershed here yet, Giles, so I'm going to ask you about metal underpants, and then I'm going to put the faders down. Okay, so off you go.
Okay. I will be totally seemly about this, all right? Because actually, I did suggest Metal Underpants and Other Curious Car Stories as the title of the book, and the publisher sort of went white and said, we can't say things like that in the bookshop. Fine. But Metal Underpants actually describes Peter Sellers. And it's a quote about Peter Sellers from Spike Milligan, who said his friend Peter Sellers changed cars so often that he regarded them as metal underpants. So I thought, well, Peter Sellers has got to go in the book. I never met him. I like some of his films. I think I loved the Pink Panther films when I was a kid, and I find them now a little bit difficult to watch. You know, they not everything is aged well, but he certainly got a fantastic canon of work. But he was a car obsessive. Yeah. I mean, he would have a car for a week and get sick of it. And any garage he was passing, if there's something in it he fancied, he would just go in and part exchange it. You know, he was a total obsessive. He was handled for many years by a man with the unlikely name of Tony Crook. Yep. Tony Crook used to own Bristol, sort of quite an expensive British.
That's the one that has the showroom on the corner of. Is it Ken High Street or that? Well, you know.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It was a real landmark. I think it's gone, unfortunately, because they went bankrupt a few years ago. But Tony Crook was quite a wheeler dealer himself. You know, entirely sort of okay. You know, not dodgy. But he in the end he had Peter Sellers' checkbook, and Sellers just said, you know, when I fancy something else, will you get it for me? And when I need to get rid of something, will you get rid of it for me? So he just never ever stopped buying cars. Even the wedding present for Britt Eklund was a car. Whether she wanted a Lotus Elan is another matter, but that's what she got. So, I'd written about him before, and I just thought he's got to go in here because he was just so fanatical about it.
And also, in the 60s, he is the embodiment of the 60s. That, we won't talk about Casino Royale because blimey, but, he's driving a Mini around London. And there's obviously a Mini undertow going on through this interview, obviously. But, he is that sort of embodiment of sort of 60s chic and cool and chic in a Mini.
He is, and he's actually even more important than that if you are a Mini aficionado. He is the person who invented the super luxury Mini. He had a couple of Rolls Royces. He wanted a Mini Cooper, but he said it was far too basic, so he took it along to them and he said, look, I'm just going to give you unlimited budget. You turn it into a pint-sized version of my Rolls. So that was where the first, it was by Hooper & Co., the first luxury Mini was his idea. So they put, leather seats in it, walnut dashboard. They had a heraldic artist to paint little stars all over the side. They put spot lamps in front. Total trendsetter, really. So that's why he's here.
I'm just thinking, I just had a revelation. Peter Sellers, the original Pimp My Ride.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, let's hope he never said that in one of his many accents.
Steam power, because people are talking about green energy and electric cars, which I can never hear them coming in the car park, and so that's another prang to me. So steam power. Somebody came up with the idea of a steam powered car, and it was obviously massively successful, Giles.
Well, there had been many steam-powered cars in the early days of motoring. It was a complete sort of. It stood as much chance of success as petrol cars. In the very early days, you'd have steam cars, electric cars, petrol cars, all sorts of things. But of course, they're very difficult to make run properly. Getting the right level of heat and steam, and plus it's pretty combustible. So they tended to sort of fall out of fashion. But there was this one guy called Peter Pellandine, and he was convinced that he could bring back the age of steam for cars. It's a rather unfortunate episode, really. He's a sort of serial man in a shed, this guy. He'd been making various kit cars in the UK and Australia. And when it came to actually giving a demo of his steam car, the Pelland, he got all the press up there at the Lotus test track. And I think they'd said, right, you can have 45 minutes before we want the circuit back to do important work. So, this thing could only manage, sort of less than 20, 30 miles an hour. And it was sort of one of those terrible days where, even he said, as all the journalists were leaving, there's such a tiny margin between success and failure.
as the Sinclair C5 went sailing past him on the straight.
Yes, but of course, the Sinclair C5, just as you said, Giles, a few minutes ago, these electric vehicles creeping up on you, these little electric, recumbent bikes and little trucks and buggies are all over the place now. So actually, we laughed at Sinclair in back in the day, but he was, basic concept, very much ahead of his time, really. So yes, I'll stick up for him, although
fair enough. Now, for kids of a certain age, we grew up with Starsky and Hutch and their car, because every good crime-fighting duo needed a car, right? A-Team was a bit old for that, and they had a van. But obviously, Starsky and Hutch, they had that Ford. Of course, it was the early 70s was the age of those brilliant, get in the back of the van and, you're nicked, and the Sweeney, which was seen there as gritty and realistic with the car chasers, and now they're a bit sort of pedestrian. But there were some great cars in there, Cortinas, etc. I think, and Ford Granadas and whatever.
Yes.
And before the Stig, there was the stunt driver for the Sweeney.
Yes, indeed. Again, somebody I never met, but I would have loved to, and I feel I know him through everything that you've just said, those car chases in movies like Robbery and Brannigan and the Sweeney and the Professionals. This was a guy called Peter Braham. Now, it's a little bit unclear about his early life. I think he did do a bit of time in jail. And when he came out, he said, he'd made up his mind he wasn't going to do that again. But he became a stuntman working around Elstree, Pinewood and Shepperton, sort of a real expert in basically landing a punch in some actor's face whilst actually not making skin contact, but making it look totally realistic. But he was quite a driver. So he got this reputation really for being able to handle powerful cars for car chases. And the producer of the Sweeney, he absolutely said, I've got to have this guy on board. So he worked over 4 series of the shows, and every car chase you see there is basically coordinated by him. Often using old Jaguars that, he knew how to get them welded up overnight to do some extra takes the next day. So these cars were, they were really pounded into the ground. He's a very interesting man. I slightly take issue with what you just said there, because when you see those sort of car chases, there's no CGI involved. There's no special effects. They're actually done on the streets. And so they, it's from a time when they could, through a combination of, sort of ninja filming and the cops looking the other way, they really could actually get realistic action. So when you see these cars being smashed up, it's actually happening. And that's what's, to me, so interesting.
In my defence, I was meaning the little pedestrian as opposed to today's CGI generated effects, and that's me digging myself out of a hole, as all good Gileses do. Now, I'm known for my fixation with the occult. So you've got the Prince of Darkness in there. So are we talking about Lucifer and a Lamborghini? What are we talking about here?
Well, I mentioned it at the beginning. I'm talking about a chap called Joseph Lucas, who he gets a very unfair kind of slating from people as the Prince of Darkness. Now, he's known as the Prince of Darkness because when the British Leyland used to export their MGs and Triumph Spitfires to the States, the lights and the indicators and the heaters didn't work properly. So as everything was stamped with the word Lucas, who was the supplier of all the electrical stuff.
Right, yes, of course.
Joseph Lucas became known as the Prince of Darkness because, whenever you went for the switch, it wouldn't go on. In fact, he died in 1902, well before there were any electrics in any cars. And he started off by selling, literally sort of brushes and dustpans door to door. Then he this is in the sort of late 19th century. Then he hit on the idea of selling ship's lamps, which became very, very popular. And that led to things like paraffin lamps and so on. So slowly he got towards things that sort of lit up or warmed up. And, his name was on this enormous company called Lucas, which made all that stuff. He died in a very weird way. He was an alcoholic when he was a younger man.
Right.
And he joined a temperance society in Birmingham and managed to sort of kick the habit and was so fastidious about never having any alcohol that when he went on a sales trip to Egypt in 1902, he refused to have, and it was around Christmas, he refused to have any of the sort of wine and things that went with all the meals. And he said, no, it's Adam's ale is the only thing I'll drink. So he drank water, caught disease and died right there. And they brought him back to the UK in a big packing case, his corpse, which had all his Lucas samples to take with him on the sales trip out there. So it's it's a terrible ending, really. But yeah, he gets to me, I find him very, very interesting. And he's one of those names I think lots of people around cars will know, and they won't really know anything about the person behind them. And another one in here I've done is a guy called Alexander Duckham.
Yeah,
as in
tires. Oil. Yeah. Oil, sorry. Yeah.
Which in the 60s and 70s, just as famous as Castrol.
Oh, yeah.
Sponsored Formula One cars and so on. Nobody really knows anything about Alexander himself. So I naturally kind of zoomed in on this guy because I thought there's got to be a lot there. And just finding a photograph of him was almost impossible. He's got his signature on a lot of oil cans, but when I rang the Duckham's company, they didn't have a picture of the bloke who founded it. So it's fun. It just goes to that thing where interesting people are so quickly forgotten.
Yeah, the thing is the big fear here that it's going to be so successful, you're going to have to do another 50 famous, because, you've only just skimmed the surface, metal underpants notwithstanding. But
I don't think I can do another one of these, because this is almost 40 years worth of back catalogue I've been able to mine. And I think anyone I've found interesting in the past, I've tended to want to write about. I might do one on perhaps just companies who found guys who founded car companies. They would be quite good. I've got a few in the book. Vincenzo Lancia is in there, and I liked him because he he never really lived to see any of the cars that made Lancia famous. But one thing that he did do was he had a very close shave in one of his early cars with his mother in the passenger seat. They were driving through the mountains, lost control of the car, and it left the road, and he almost killed his mum, basically. And that gave him the shivers and a terrible feeling of guilt. So he used to lie in bed with the light off, and on his bedside table was a pad and pen, and he spent night after night trying to think how he could make cars safer. After that, brush with death. And he came up with a front-wheel drive system for the Lancia Lambda, which obviously gives a lot better road holding than just having the rear wheels going. And that was the whole inspiration behind his
Italians saving their mothers is the thing with front-wheel drive. The book is called 3 Million Miles in a Volvo and Other Curious Car Stories. It's by Giles Chapman. Giles, if people want to find you online, where do they find you?
I'm at gileschapman.com. But you'll find the book on Amazon and at the History Press, which is my publisher, and all around, hopefully. So.
Thanks for your time today.